This is Dano Kildsig, Dane Olin Kildsig Jr., my real name, coming to you from my garage with a cat on my lap. A couple of years ago, I started listening to podcasts, a lot of different people, and there's really, I thought, there's an undeniable fact is that I have recording equipment, a garage, mental problems, and a lot of cats, and I've already been recording people for years. So why not do a podcast? Also, I like to talk about myself. That's a prerequisite, right? This is episode 2 of I Could Have Been Somebody. And this podcast, it's about failure. There's no, you can sugarcoat it, but when I describe it to perceptive people, they say, oh, it's about failure. My friend Chad said that. And I want to say, no, it's not. But yeah, it's about failure. But it's about triumph. It's about having a dream when we were young. And where are we now? That's a simple thing. Where are you now? What was your dream? What went wrong? You might be able to hear the heater down here in the garage because it's fall in San Francisco. It's a little chilly. Today's guest is Tom Pitts, an old friend of mine, at least an old acquaintance from maybe 35 years ago when I first moved to the city and got a job as a bike messenger. I met Tom. He was playing in a band called Short Dogs Grow, and they got signed relatively soon after I knew him to Rough Trade Records. I still remember Tom showing me the record contract when we were, standing by waiting for orders at Tu Embarcadero or something. And, of course I was jealous. I was happy for him. I was a little resentful, because I thought, that should have been me, or it will be me. You just wait, that kind of thing. But over the years, we had a mutual friend that would always inform me whenever someone talked shit about me. And he would inform anyone. He just doesn't have that filter. And so I had a kind of a chip on my shoulder about Tom, but at the same time, I undeniably liked him and hoped he would be okay. Because he, like a lot of people, a lot of messengers, a lot of people I knew, just people I know in general, got hooked on drugs in a way that made them lose everything. But Tom has persevered. He eventually got clean, and he doesn't really play music anymore, but now he writes books. And I can tell you, as someone who writes books, or doesn't, not someone who writes books, but I've written 4 books. I wrote them when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, after returning from Hollywood, trying to make it big, or just trying to do something, really. Because I'd always had that plan. I'm going to do my records, and then I'm going to write science fiction. Well, I wrote my science fiction, and it might have been prescient in some ways, but it sucked. There was no discernible plot, or, they sucked. So, and then I noticed that I was very depressed at the time, but I noticed that some of my characters were writing songs. There was always a musician in the books, at least one. And I would write songs, from the character's viewpoint as part of the story, which is really stupid. But eventually I decided, or at least I noticed that when I was writing songs, playing music, mostly when I was writing songs, I was happy. And yes, I wanted to perform them somehow, but that was still secondary from writing it. And when I shifted my focus to that again, regardless of whether anyone would ever hear them, I wasn't happy, but I was less depressed. So I pursued that. And so when I heard that Tom was writing books, it wasn't science fiction, but it was crime, true crime, or just gritty noir stuff. And so I would look, every time I went to the bookstore, like I'm an addictive book reader, book buyer. I buy books more than I read. I'd always look for in the crime detective area for Tom Pitts and would never see it. Eventually, I decided, it wasn't something I thought about a lot, but just over the course of many years, I would kind of look in bookstores. And then one day I was like, I thought, wait, what the fuck? I'll look on Amazon. And lo and behold, all of his books are on Amazon. So I ordered one and I got it. And, part of me wanted it to be shitty or just confirm that, like me, he wasn't doing something good or whatever. And then part of me wanted it to be great because I liked Tom. I had conflicting emotions like we do about all things. And then I read it, and this particular one was a novella. And I didn't think about that when I started reading it, but then when it was over, it was really short, and it wrapped up. It had a cogent storyline and everything, but it wasn't a novel. It wasn't like, I guess I was holding him to a standard of like Elmore Leonard or Carl Hiaasen or some shit like that. But there were some cool little turns of phrase in it. And then when I decided to start this podcast, he was like one of the first people I thought of. Like, what's going on in that guy's head? So I ordered another book off Amazon, and it was really good. Like, it got to be, usually I have like my bed book I'm reading like when I go to sleep, my book that I have where I lay on my back and my cat lays on my tummy kind of thing down in the garage, and then I have the bathroom book. But Tom's book, Hustle, I eventually found myself reading in all areas. I even took it with me when I would go out to eat by myself because I wanted to know what the fuck would happen. And he had me. He had me in the grip of the story. And I got to give it to him. It was good. And before he came over, I was nervous because of all the years of history we have, not just between us, but between everyone we know. And we ended up having a great conversation and a great time. And like I view this podcast, like I said, it's about failure and triumph and what happens in between. But really, like when Tom was here, the second he came through the door, it was just like we were hanging out at the bar, just talking shit, talking about our lives. And Tom is a very nice, humble, funny guy, and I had a great time talking to him, and here it is. Premise for me around the podcast is like people, and you're like the flagship get of my, I've been recording people for years and just like kind of people from Hate Street, whatever, but now I've narrowed it down to like people that were striving for one thing when they were younger, like in a band, and then later either are still striving or are striving for another thing, like you're writing, or people that have given up. Like I want to know the journey, you know, and
we already know about the successful journeys.
We know about the successful journeys, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's never, where's the people that didn't, know, like I want to interview like the guy that went to high school with Janny Lane from Warrant, like, whoever that guy is.
The drummer that got kicked out.
Exactly, and I knew a lot of those people in LA that got kicked out of versions of band. Like I knew one of my best friends still was kicked out of Blind Melon before they were Blind Melon. All right, well, the place to start though is Canada, right?
Yeah,
that's where you're from.
I was I was a green kid, rural Canada, not just like Calgary, which is kind of Alberta's certainly at the time was kind of like Canada's Texas. Heavy oil industry, very conservative, but to even make that more intense, I was out in the country outside of Calgary, so I was just surrounded by country roads and green trees, and I felt like I never wanted to see another tree in my life. And my plan was I wanted to go to New York or San Francisco, and I'd never been to New York. And there was a small pack of Canadian kids I knew, punk rock kids that were coming down here and being bike messengers.
Right.
So there was a path, you know what I mean?
You knew someone at least.
Yeah, I had a place to stay, which in 1984 was this one-bedroom apartment, enormous one-bedroom apartment, but we had 7 Canadian bike messengers living up there, and I moved into the closet.
How far outside of Calgary?
Too far to go to school in Calgary. I went to school in a small town called Cochrane and had to take a bus, like the literal walk through the snow, quarter mile to the end of the driveway to take the bus. Driven by a little old lady. Probably shouldn't have been driving on icy roads in the middle of winter with 30 kids.
It sounds exactly like, I grew up outside of Purdue,
Yeah.
outside of West Lafayette, surrounded by cows and trees, had to go to the bus.
Well, yeah, and that, I don't know how close you were to the city, but anytime we went, I was so bored and it was so just dark, in the country. There's no light. And every time I could see the glow of the city from Calgary, I longed to be surrounded by cement. I wanted to be in the big city.
I want to be there.
Yeah, dirty alleys, sirens, all that shit I wanted to be in the middle of. And achievement unlocked on that one. But
now back there though, you had friends in high school that were into punk rock though?
I went to boarding school for a couple of years. I went to school out in this small town, and I actually had a couple friends who we were the outcasts of the entire town. We had a really terrible band. We didn't even know. I mean, we didn't really understand the functioning of you play the same note, the same fret on the bass as the guitar. Yeah. We were just faking it the whole way through. But eventually, I was getting into a bit of trouble, and my parents shipped me off to the upper middle class version of reform school, which was boarding school, and I spent 2 years there until I said, I didn't really intend on going to college, and my parents were like, "What? Why are we?" And so they put me back in public school my final year in the middle of Calgary. I would ride with my dad to work in the morning, and I was a big stoner, and I didn't assimilate at all, and because of my private school credits, I didn't have to go to all the class. So I had these short days, and 2 weeks after I graduated, my dad wrote me a note, Mr. Customs Man, please allow my son, he has our permission to travel to San Francisco. And I got in this friend's van, and he was going to San Diego. And I got a ride to San Francisco.
Dropped you off there?
Yeah. Well, I used to go out to his crazy hillbilly type farm that was all spider webbed with dirt tracks and back, and we'd race around cars, 12 years old, driving old Toyotas around fast, playing Dukes of Hazzard with real cars.
You don't need skateboards if you grew up with that, I guess.
Yeah, guns and motorcycles. It was, in hindsight, it was a great upbringing, but it just I longed to be just out of it.
Isn't it weird? I look back at that little town. I just wanted, even though I stayed around 3 years after high school, I really wasn't there because I was just doing lots of acid and stuff or whatever. But I just wanted to get the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
And now I look back and I was like, man, I had every advantage, and it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
It's just like.
Well, now it comes down to I don't think I had. And why would we have any appreciation for quality of life at that point?
Well, you don't know any better.
Yeah, and those your values are different, and to at least be fair to myself, I always say that, I'm doing the Uber gig and telling, I had no appreciation of quality of life. Sure, I'd move back to Canada, but I don't, because I still have those weird sort of core values that you carve out in your formative years. You don't lose, and so I don't really value. I still don't really care about having that big of a house or that. I don't. A lot of that stuff still just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah,
which is why I'm walking around in jeans and fucking Converse still. I try not to focus. I don't mean to derail our trajectory here, but I try not to focus too much, because certain days, I'm out there listening to the radio, whether it's NPR or KGO or whatever the fuck. It seems like all anybody focuses on is on how unlivable San Francisco is.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous.
The Bay Area is, and it just some days it just gets me down. I get so depressed, but I'm still living, functioning here.
I still love it here.
Yeah, There's plenty, and I forget about how many of us are still here. We can just assume everybody else is gone but us. I mean, Carmelo lives, 6 blocks away.
I know. Well, so you didn't really have a band in Canada. You kind of had one.
Yeah.
And then
2 weeks, a couple months before we moved, I had this band called Magic Roundabout. And the singer went on to this pretty successful Canadian band, whose name I can't remember now, and a couple other guys, one or two guys from high school, and we played one gig, but I had already set my sights on San Francisco, so I was I remember a little side note too. A couple weeks, there's this place called HC's in Canada, or in Calgary, and it was kind of like the Hangout. It was the punk club and whatever. But right in that same period, right towards the end of my high school, when I was just watching the clock, Tales of Terror came through.
Really?
And that was the first time I met Rat, and clearly, and Trip, who's my brother now. I love Trip and see him often as I can. But they went through. There was nobody there. It was a weeknight. And they went through and handed everybody in the club mushrooms. They were like, like, hey, we're from San Francisco, and even though they're from Sacramento, and they fucking got everybody high in the club, and they did their Tales of Terror thing, Rat throwing the mic around his neck and doing flips, and I was like, oh my god, and that just sort of cemented my. I was going either way, but it really.
You already knew that, but this guy's just sealed it for you.
These are my people.
Yeah, first night we got our apartment, I was walking our dog around the block there in the Castro, and this van pulls over, just screeches to a halt, and these guys come falling out, and they're all beating the shit out of each other, and it was that, now I can't think of the name of the band either, because I'm fucking old, but Joey was the singer, maybe?
No, Verbal Abuse.
Verbal Abuse. It was those guys.
Scotty was the singer.
Scotty was yeah, that's what I'm trying. And then they were literally just fighting, and it was all band members. They had like their jean jackets with their leathers out, and I was just like, man, it's
a real deal.
It's a real deal. San Francisco, man.
I mean, occasionally I'll get that. And like I say, I'm not disparaging the city, because I do still love it here, and it's an evolution that we're going through, and things are gonna, people don't think things are ever gonna change no matter what's going on in life, but things are gonna change. Whether it's Google pulling out and the housing opening up, or whether it's a giant rip in the earth and we all fall in, or the economy tanks, whatever, it'll change. But I occasionally get those, like, sort of olfactory memories, what I mean? Where you get a certain scent, and just the weird sort of excitement of being near or Sound of Music or Mabuhay or places like that just seem so odd and dangerous and interesting and full of history and stuff. I always had that feeling too of, man, it just all happened right before I got here.
The vats were done when I got here.
Yeah,
and I always wished
at the same time.
I could have gone to the vats,
Yeah, that was one. And Tool and Die had shut down, and just but then you realize you can look back and go, wow, I was there at the Mabuhay and on Broadway and all those things before they were gone.
Yeah,
or Chatterbox, for instance,
The scene was dead. When we got into punk rock, the scene was already dead. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of where punk rock started and everything.
Yeah.
And in high school, I thought I was king of the world because I had spiked hair. And it was like, 3 years later than London already, It's like... Pfft.
Well, I will say that I feel pretty, not privileged, but just lucky to have plugged into, like, just getting... It's hard to convey to people, like, how weird San Francisco was with things like Flipper, Tragic Mulatto, and all those things that were just so unpunk and anti everything. And I guess it was like that in a lot of cities. Just in the 80s, when we were finding our own sort of path, so much of punk rock turned into that just conformist, 4/4, super fast, and it got kind of dull for me. But there was always those fringe bands that I was attracted to, like shit, like the L.A., the Minutemen and X, and that's kind of where my interests were. Yeah,
well, the outsider bands though, like Tragic Mulatto, like a lot of the stuff was like an assault on the audience, and it always seemed like it would be fun to play in that band, but I don't necessarily want to listen to it all the time.
Kale shooting hot dogs, literally.
But Butthole Surfers were like that,
Yeah, they, but just the idea that it was art, and it's just supposed to be not like anything else. And it kind of was a bummer that punk rock turned into like everybody really trying hard to be just like everyone
exactly else. Like that. That derailed my first band. We had a really cool first band, and me and the bass player wanted to play hardcore, like faster, and our drummer couldn't play fast, and so we basically broke up the band. And I always regret that because
Well, Soul Asylum's first band name was Harder, Faster, Louder, Faster.
Loud, Fast Rules.
Yeah. But it turns out it doesn't.
Was Soul Asylum one of your favorite bands?
No. Which is funny because we ended up kind of associating with them a bit because we played with them when we were like at the Viz Club when they first came through, and I have an affinity for them, and I it's just one of those things like we thought we were trying to sound like the Replacements, but we ended up looking like a band that was trying to sound like Soul Asylum. You know, in your brain, you think you're like, this sounds just like Eddie Van Halen. Other people are, no, exactly. It's not.
No, for some reason I associate you with Soul Asylum and the Mats. You know, I don't know.
We wanted to be the Replacements bad, but I didn't. I don't think I fully got Soul Asylum till later. You know, I understood what their sort of aesthetic was.
I didn't get the Replacements till much later.
Yeah.
Like, at the time, I just thought these guys just get too drunk to play, and they just yell at the. You know, it seemed dumb to me.
Yeah.
And listening to it, it didn't get me at that time. Then, you know, years later, I listened to it. I'm like, what was I thinking?
I think I just I had a job packing boxes at Rough Trade Records, and that's when I first heard the Let It Be record, and I think that's when it clicked. When I heard some of the Androgynous with the piano, I'm like, what is this? And then I started to realize that it was much. They just had so much more texture than other bands, you know.
Yeah, but also they have the greatest story ever.
Yeah.
You know, just you can picture Paul walking by, home from work, and the kids are jamming in the basement. And he goes in, and then one of the most influential bands ever. It just happens like that. You know?
I don't know that part of the story.
That's the legend anyway. That Westerberg would walk home from work and go by them jamming in the basement, and one day he just went in.
Lately, people have been writing me and saying, "Hey, man, have you heard this Don't Tell a Soul thing? The replacement for, you know, there's this, you know,
stripped down version."
Yeah, that they battled the producer over, and I couldn't figure out how to fucking play the fucking music from the article, but I read it and I realized that, wow, that's what maybe killed that band. You know?
Well, yeah, I lad on a lot of stuff. I don't know. Even though I love the stuff afterwards, it's still, with Bob Stinson in it, it's still what I regard, you know.
Yeah, well, it's like many things. AC/DC, you know, I still like the Angus stuff.
Everybody has their little fanboy sort of beliefs about stuff, you know.
And I hate to be that, you know, hey man, it's David Lee Roth, not Sammy Hagar guy. Yeah, that's sort of the most extreme example. Right?
I would never listen to Van Hagar. Are you kidding me?
See, exactly. See, there you go.
Please. You're living in the closet. You got your bike messenger now.
Yeah, I went for my first job interview. I took the 22 Fillmore from the Castro all the way, or got it to, you know, and went down to and got a job at I think it was Jack in the Box on Fillmore and Lombard, and I went in and the guy said, you know what? You seem pretty sharp. You could probably be management material. And I walked out, and I just never came back.
Go back to that.
I never went back. I just never even an hour.
Yeah.
And I went home, and John Adonis got me a job at Quicksilver. And God, what a possibly regrettable thing that was.
Who knows what that would have led to, though, you know?
Well, that's where I met Greg then, although he didn't join the band till way later. You know, Mark, who sang, and Carmela. But me and Carmela kind of buckled down, and I think I can't remember if I was working at Rough Trade when we actually started the band, but we decided we were gonna teach each other how to play and make music, and that's what we did, you know. And it was that sort of, I guess, you know, I don't know, I'm not a fucking teenager in a band in 2019. You know, there's all that, you know, well, we can make a website and we can, you know, record our stuff. And
yeah, but you guys, I was so envious of you guys, you know, not necessarily musically, no offense, but because of your drive and your, like,
well,
you guys would head out on tour, you had, like...
That was the thing we did that no one else was doing, and you're right.
That's all I wanted to do.
Some other, you know, another messenger band and not doing anything special here, but we got in the van. And I was thinking about this, the way we did it, we had like this, remember like you get like some phone number that you could charge to?
Yeah.
And me and Carmela booked this whole fucking tour with the little black book that everybody passed around. You know, we gave it to NoFX, and we got it from someone, and called these people from the phone booth, making all these illegal phone calls back then. It's such a weird...
That's way more ambitious than I'm going to go make a fucking website on whatever.
Yeah, on Squarespace or...
it's a lot easier now. Now you just you feel like satisfied because I made a new SoundCloud.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm done. Now I'm waiting for people to discover me, you know. You were being proactive about going out there.
Yeah, getting in our 66 Ford Econoline, and luckily we had Joe Patu as a drummer who was a good mechanic, because it broke down a lot on the road.
Joe, he's a good drummer too.
Yeah, I miss him. I hung out with him, now a couple years ago now. But I just showed up in Portland, and I was like on Facebook, and I did, you know, like some check-in in the bar, like, hey, I'm having a good time, and He fucking walked in 5 minutes later, and I hadn't seen him really since almost since he had quit the band, and it was so, there's that weird, sounds corny, but it's very true, that band family thing.
Yeah, a lot of times whatever resentments you had from back then just go away like instantly when you see the person.
Well, he quit the band. We were such a, socialist band. Everybody got the same food no matter what. We got, and he was like, I want, when we go to Burger King for their 59-cent hamburgers, Joe's like, look, I'm a drummer. I take more energy. I want more than one hamburger. Everybody gets one, Joe gets two. And we were like, that's not okay. He's like, fuck it, I'm going home.
He left in the middle of the tour, huh?
Yeah, he left. He quit in El Paso. And after a very drunken night, and God bless him, in hindsight, yeah, I think we could have just given him the extra hamburger. Clearly, he was, exerting more energy than us. But,
it's always easy to look back at that kind of stuff. But okay, so Short Dogs though. Then before that tour though came when Heathfield was out.
Heathfield came with us on the first tour, and Joe came with us on the first tour, and we were dubbing our demos in the back, tape to tape in the back of cars, and we went out 3rd Street and got these shirts that we had screened from some like Pakistani shirt guy, and he's like, they were like $3 a shirt or something, and we're like, awesome. We sold shirts. We were screening shirts on the road and selling them. And then when we went back out on tour the next year, we went back, and people were hanging their shirts on the walls and stuff because they were so distorted and stretched. They became like these like awful.
They're like art pieces at this point, yeah.
And putting them on pillows, and it's like, wow, sorry about that. But yeah, I forget that sort of, I still remember on my bike down on Shipley Alley, taking the contract from 6th Street, going into acting like I'm reading it over and I don't really understand anything, and signing it and kind of feeling like, well, I do remember the moment, but I'm going to remember this moment because this is where,
this is where it all began.
Off. Yeah, this is
the kind of moment I'm trying to get to where you think this is going to happen for me.
There's going to be no more bikes, and no, I'm going to be, it's going to be straight up from here, topmost of the popmost.
But that I saw you that day at maybe 3-2 Embarcadero, and you had the contract with you, and you showed it to me. You're like, "This is my record contract," and you were so excited about it, and I was like, it was like kind of resentful, but I just thought it was so cool, and I was like, this is going to be me next, whatever.
It's so funny because the same thing happens with writing now. The same, and I see people get, excited and even people who get contracts with big publishers. And I realize that if you're not fucking Stephen King, they don't really throw much weight behind you anyways. You're still schluffing, the same thing, doing readings to nobody and begging people to review your book on Facebook. And
don't have to carry equipment around though.
Yeah, well, true. You got to carry a box of books that's always full because you're not selling. It never gets lighter.
But speaking of that though, I just read Hustle.
Oh, good.
Because
I saw that picture.
I don't know how many years I've known that you were writing books, and I would always look like at Green Apple or where I didn't think I'd ever see it at the Booksmith. They're just too narrow.
Well, hey, just for the record, world. You can walk in any bookstore and have them order it. It's not like a Amazon only thing. So you can just say, "Hey, can you get Tom Pizza's 101 or whatever the case?" And they can do it. Although Green Apple had some because I did a reading there. But
at the one over on Clement.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, because it's really, if the author has to go and actually be the distributor, like call back, "Hey, can I get my $4? Did you sell that book?" It just becomes too much. Like I put some at Bird and Beckett, the one in the and that's a cool job. Actually, they called me and asked for books, but yeah, it's.
But you had to take them in there.
Yeah.
First.
And to keep track of that stuff, so I kind of let the dream, the magic of, I'm seeing my book on a bookshelf go, because it's just, yeah.
Well, you never know, man. That's good. So how long ago was Hustle? How many have you written since then?
I wrote Hustle in 2013. That's when it came out with a company called Snubnose Press that eventually got bought up by the company I'm with now, Down and Out. So Down and Out re-released it, I think, in 2015. People really responded to that book, and I don't know if you know this, but I sold a movie option.
Really?
Well, I know. Let me rephrase that. Well, no, it's the option. The option. It's not like selling the rights. I sold the option, and I sold it for the novel instead of the story. But we're still arguing over that. But I've been with this director Kat that I've been working with over the past 2 years, more than 2 years. We adapted the script and then chopped it down. Spent all this time going back and forth. And
Hustle.
Of Hustle.
Yeah.
And we kept on. He kept on getting bigger and bigger jobs. Directing or now producing. He's produced some like big series. Like
What's this guy? What's his name?
His name Pat McKinley, who actually I'll do the lineage because I think you might know or at least know his sister. But and he's been a executive producer on American Gods 2 and Loudest Voice in the Room. And so his career has been sort of taking off. But every time they get a big gig, it kind of puts Hustle on the side.
Oh yeah.
But whatever, all things happen.
Until he's really big, and then he decides to.
Well, I just got
Hustle.
I just got the word they hired some casting director because there's actors attached to it. It's that far down. I've been giving shooting schedules and budgets and it's I kind of play it off because I've been for 2 years I've been doing the same thing. It's like like having that rough trade record contract. Like it's gonna start happening to me now, and
no more Uber or whatever, right?
I had to emotionally just sever myself from it and just really convince myself, look, man, it's not going to happen, just because it threw me off my writing game. I had, I could, well, first, because the hurry up and wait of writing the script really kind of, I put everything else on pause because all my hopes and dreams were tied up in, because I'm not selling that many books on Amazon, but if I had a movie deal, then, it's rising tide raises all ships or whatever. It's going to help. But it's been so long and I've had books released and still I haven't even been able to announce it and that kind of thing. But I just got the word a couple weeks ago. It's like this casting director wants to make these changes because it's supposed to go to this guy, So I finally have to open the script again and do a bunch of changes and notes so I feel like it's active and has some momentum again. But it's
Yeah, it's always going to be like that. But so it affected your current writing though, because you didn't write as much, or you.
I've stopped. Okay, you asked a question of so Hustle and what happened since then. So Hustle, I wrote a book called Piggyback, which was started as a short story, and I'm like, wait, this is it's got a roll to it. Maybe I can make it into a novella, and I did that. Got it published with Snubnose, and then I wrote Hustle was supposed to be a short story, and then I kind of liked sort of the twist I was rolling with, and I just kept it. Well, maybe it'll be a novella. It's going out. It's going to be a novel. So then after that, I wrote a book called American Static, which is awesome and I'm very proud of. Then I wrote a book called Cold Water, which my agent at the time couldn't sell, and we had a falling out over. So I fired my agent, and while this was all happening, I was writing a book called 101, which is my opus to Humboldt County and the weed business, and I ended up releasing that with Down and Out, and Cold Water was still sitting. So Cold Water's coming out next year. So if without knowing that, it seems like, well, he's cranking a book out every couple of years. But the reality is Cold Water's been written, and 101 was finishing when the whole Hustle script thing started. So really, I haven't written anything substantial in like 2 years.
Quick side question though, like, do you think you would write stories even if if they were never going to be in a book, if never do you write them designed to be books, or they just come into your head and you can't help it? You got to get them out.
I'd like to say that that's the case, but I don't know if it is because life is so exhausting down here at the bottom rung, working 7 days a week that I don't know if I'd be sitting there. Maybe short stories, but I let the stories go and the novel started to happen because I really felt a passion for doing that. But here's how I got into this thing. I got a friend named Joe Clifford who was writing stuff and starting to have a little bit of success, and he ran a reading thing called Lip Service West that was supposed to be all true stories and every few months. And he kept like, Tom, you got to write, you got to, because when we were strung out junkies on the street together, I was thinking I was writing a book. I had this and he teaches me about lugging a computer around in a shopping cart. Really, it wasn't a shopping cart, but living in squats and like how,
You were romanticizing your own addiction basically and saying.
But I was strung out heavily on heroin, doing too much speed, and writing this book. this whole time, you know, and keeping it on floppy disks and all that. And so 10 years later, when we had both cleaned up, he dug me up and was like, dude, you gotta start writing. So I wrote this story, and he had me read at one of his events, and it went over so well. And I still, you know, the story's like my go-to, my easy. I know this will slam, and people are probably tired of hearing it. But that's what kicked it off. That sort of, which is similar to playing music. It was a immediate response.
Yeah.
You know, you could hear the laughter, and so that I kind of ran with it from there. If I wasn't writing like crime fiction, I would probably be compelled to at least write, which I started off doing. I should probably go back to it. Is just the first person true stories of my ridiculous life on the street. You know, fucking. And I wrote a story about me and Jimmy Dredd accidentally shooting up mouse turds, and called Peanut Brittle, and it's brutal. But some of that stuff, when you tell people, if you lay it out right, and it's got the arc of a well constructed joke, it's just
It could be funny, yeah.
It is. It's hilarious, actually. But especially if you know Jimmy and his whiny voice, you know. But yeah, there's that sort of gallows humor.
You did 2 albums with Rough Trade.
Yeah.
And then did you start to get into dope during that time, or?
I was definitely shooting dope during Matt Dillon, because I remember the girlfriend I had at the time, we had dope delivered to the studio, and I remember Steve from Rough Trade kind of seeing us getting dope by the front doorway, and him just having that sort of disgusted look.
Yeah.
And me feeling like, you know, I was such a fucking idiot. So sort of like delusional. I had that, just that misconception about, well, you know, I had all the wrong influences, like the William Burroughs, Keith Richards, Johnny Thunder, that whole, you know, misguided.
Bukowski,
that whole nihilistic punk rock shoot dope to, you know, it was such a thing in punk rock, you know, like shooting.
So weird. Like when I was a messenger, I remember everyone, you know, it seemed like they were on dope, and you'd just go south of Market and there'd just be someone on their bike. I mean, no names, not you, but like just with their eyes shut, like leaning up against the wall with their bike, and I was like,
yeah,
you know,
and or if it was speed, they were still shooting it. There was something. I think, you know, maybe that's a lot to do with Sid Vicious, or maybe it's a lot to do with just saying fuck you to society. But the whole angry, violent act of jabbing a needle in your arm, same as, like, you know, it's not that different from something that has never occurred to me. But, you know, like people who cut themselves, or
cutters, yeah.
You know, it's like a real sort, you know.
Plus, it numbs everything. If you have that receptor, you know, if you're susceptible to that, like. You know, I'm lucky. I didn't like dope. I did it plenty, but I didn't.
Well, you know, they say this especially with people who were dope addicts, that marijuana hits a lot of the same receptors or buttons, or satisfies in the same way. And I did figure out that later in life after I cleaned up, and I couldn't drink because I had hepatitis C, and I smoked dope heavy for 10 years, and it absolutely works. Man, I wish I had figured that out earlier. I could. I remember, here's my one Dave Perner story. When I was strung out living at Carmela's on her couch, she had Perner call me from like fucking, he was in tour in Europe or something, and he was, you know, he's like, you know, put on the spot. It's like, hey, yeah, he's telling me to, like, you know, sort of semi-sarcastic, kind of, do it for the kids, man. Come on, what are you doing? Get off the dope. And I remember saying to him, just, you know, like, man, why can't I just keep it at beer and bong hits? Because that's what he is. He's beer and bong hits, and that's what I can do now. But I mean, I couldn't figure it out then. I had to always sort of. Well,
you're an extremist, man. You had something in you. I mean, I understand that.
And I think it's a way to be like. It's not correct, but it's. I think in a diluted way, you think you're like doing something bad, like you're the sort of. The baddest bad boy you can be, you know what I mean? You know, it's like no one can, because I wasn't.
I'm getting back at society by doing this to myself.
I wasn't a brawler, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I couldn't sort of prove my tough guyness any other way than just absolute sort of extremities of doing substances.
What do you got there, a knife?
Yeah, because I'm in my brain opening up a beer.
Oh, you're gonna have a beer.
I can't imagine now if somebody was bringing fucking needles and spoons and shit around one of my kids. And actually, I've had a couple experiences. I have scared kids away from my older son because he's a partner and he's a wild man. But I've had to, like, Yeah, sure. I remember doing this to him when he was in junior high. It's like, okay, I'll give your friend a ride home. And on the way home, I would like pull over and listen, motherfucker, and I would just put the fear of God in him. Hey, what happened to that kid? He doesn't come around anymore.
Come around.
And I wish someone had done that shit for me. But I remember at your house in Hollywood, just going over there, and you like, it's not cool, because that poor motherfucker was doing his best to clean up, and I was not helping.
I never banged anything ever, and I was so naive. Like at that house, like you'd come by whoever, and I probably would say, "I don't bring that shit around here," and you'd be like, "Cool," but then I'd go back to the studio, and it would just go on as normal. Back to Hustle for a second, which I think really captures like. I was pleasantly surprised because I read Knuckleball, the novella.
Yeah.
And I personally don't like novellas because I want a fucking big, thick book I can read, and I want to have plot twists and all this shit. But not too crazy for me to, I get lost otherwise. But then I just kept going, and it had layers, and I was like, oh, he's going somewhere with this. And then I found myself really like, because I almost got like 3 books going. Yeah. I wanted to read it before you came over. And then I finished it several days ago because I just was like, I got to find out what happens, and it was really good.
It's well, thank you. It's and that one was a real, it keeps going, and I was on fire. It felt good.
But how much did you know when you started writing it? Did you have the whole thing mapped out?
No, not at all.
The tape, the VCR tape, and
Here was my plan, and first of all, I will say this, because I get this all the time, because people are, my friend Joe Clifford and I, who are often associated, because we were both out in the street, we were junkies, now we're both writers, right? And people just assume that it's somehow autobiographical. But the idea for the book came from when I was driving a cab. I had these 2 regular hookers in the back of the car. It was a Russian girl and an older black girl, not that old, but she had been around the streets more. And the black girl was telling the Russian girl what Johns they could rob, what Johns they couldn't rob, what Johns they could rob and let the pimp know, and what Johns they could rob and not let the pimp know. And just this whole sort of categorization, I realized, that is the second oldest profession in the world.
That was good. I remember that in the book. That was good. That line, like the second oldest.
Yeah, so I was like, I can use this. And then I decided to twist it to male prostitutes just because of San Francisco and the drug thing. But the idea, what I wanted to convey in the book, like, my whole thing is like, I'm the guy that's in the movies always going, that could never happen, Yeah,
exactly, right.
You can't get superpowers from a radioactive spider.
Gotta be plausible.
And I really wanted to show, because it's so much in movies and books, they show junk, they'll introduce a character as having a drug problem, and then they never revisit it. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, he's a junkie. He was in the bathroom shooting up, but he's never sick or he's never high. And I really wanted to show that constant, like, no matter what these kids are going, and it comes through in the book better than the script, but because we had to condense so much, you know what I mean? The week long, it has to be a weekend. But just the idea that, like, every 4 or 5 hours, they could be being chased down and still like, hey, where's the bathroom? Because that's what the junkies do, man. It doesn't matter what's going on around them. They still got to find a bathroom and shoot up. So that was the goal of the book. But my idea was, and spoiler alert for the world, but it was the idea of these 2 kids blackmailing this guy that they don't realize was a criminal defense attorney. The criminal defense attorney is being blackmailed by someone more sinister. The guy calls, the criminal defense attorney calls his biker friend, ex-client, I guess, to clear the guy out, and they all converge at the house at the same time. That was my idea for wrapping it up. That was my, like, this is going to be another novella. It's going to be a good one. And when they all converge, that'll kind of like be the moment. Because that's what happened in Piggyback. That was my sort of like, you have a bunch of characters, you bring them all in the same room, chaos happens, and let the dust settle. But then I realized it could keep going. It was, and the plot was bigger. And it didn't really take a lot of like, It just felt right to keep going. Excuse me. So that's how that came about. I did not have it all planned. And I was very, in the next couple books, I used the total Stephen King, you take characters, you put them in a situation, and then let the story write itself. Sounds simple, and I was a big fan of that. But then, this Coldwater, the one that's coming out, I had some stuff going on in life, and it's just harder as time goes by. And I'm considering maybe next time. I've written 4 books that are all crime novels in the present in Northern California. And I was starting to write another one, and I'm like, I feel like I've said this, or I feel like kind of like I'm just cranking out the same thing. So I got kind of stuck on the next one. And I got 20,000 words. Like a novel's about 75, 80,000 words. Mine are anyway. And I got 20,000 words into this fucking thing, and I stalled, and I realized, you know what, I might have to be a grown-up and do a synopsis and kind of do a little planning. But, yeah.
It hasn't stopped me from writing the same 100 country songs in the last, 5-10 years. I mean, I think you got your handle on a genre from this book in particular. I'll now have to read the other ones, but, yeah, I mean, you could be, why not define a genre?
Well,
Bay Area, preserving the grit in the Bay Area in the face of the tech,
Well, my beyond these four, and I really, I think 101, the idea is it's a kid who gets in trouble in the city. You don't really see any of that, but he goes up to hide out at a place where actually, I used as a model for my, my brain, like how the layout is. This pot farm where my son was working up in Humboldt County, where I went up and trimmed.
When you were living in LA, how long were you there for?
Oh God, probably less than a year.
Yeah, and what you're doing down there, dispatching for?
The idea was Pete wanted to open whatever it was, Pete's Mom and Pops, whatever he was calling it, a South version, and he had a big account up here that was sort of supposed to call us all the time there, so he rented a 2-bedroom apartment at somewhere near the National exit off to 10, right by Culver City, and I was supposed to go down there and do everything.
Be the guy.
The phone never rang. And so I had this real sort of, and it was, it was the 91. So I had to, you had to physically, you couldn't carry a phone around. So, run to the store, run back. But I went strung out thinking I would clean up, that'll be it. It's what an idiot.
In LA, I'll clean up.
Yeah. Well, I don't know anybody. First fucking day, I on the phone to somebody up here. Can you send me something? You know anybody down here? Then I got on my 1-speed bicycle and I rode all the way down fucking Venice Beach or Pico or something, all the way down out. Hey, got any dope? Got any Chiba? Until I figured it out and just, and I don't know if I don't think I ever did a delivery for him. And after a while, he was gonna shut up shop. But I left. It was the week of the riots.
Were you there for the riots?
Yeah, but I was in an unrelated situation. My brother came up to visit me. He lived in Newport Beach at the time and saw how I was living and realized, something's way off. You need to come down here. And that's just as it all broke out. So I ended up going back after the riots, realizing the pawn shops where I had pawned my amp and my guitar had been burned or looted.
Seriously? Like your shit got burned in the riots?
Well, yeah, in the pawn shops.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, it's crazy.
And the apartment was fucked up, and so I ended up just and I coerced him into him and I guess my parents. They somehow teamed up and got me to a rehab. It was my first rehab experience.
Where was that?
A place in Arizona. Yeah, this is the only rehab I've actually ever been to. I went, and years later, when I was like seriously strung out on the streets here and involved in crime and being like a hobo, they sent me to Betty Ford. I went over not literally, but I
just walked out.
Well, I left against medical advice after a couple days.
Wow. Did they have to? That can't be cheap, man.
Well, I think I don't know what kind of rebate they got, but I learned something. My family was cutting me off and that you leave and you're done. And I had like just enough money for a Greyhound back. And I go to the bus station. I can't remember how I got there. I walked or something. I go to the bus station in Palm Springs, and there's some dude sitting there, and he's buff as hell. And he had just come visited his girl at Betty Ford, and he goes, he's just standing there, and I go, hey, when'd you get out? Because he looked fresh out of the joint, because my spider senses were pretty sharp.
Yeah.
And so we rode the bus back. He was going to Pomona, and that's where he got off. He was like, you should just get off here, man. I go to AA and blah, blah, blah. And he gave me two of the greatest pieces of advice that actually kind of propelled me towards my eventual cleaning up. One was, man, fuck this place. They got rehab everywhere, and it only costs $1. It's called AA. And he's right. I still tell people that. It's like, well, we're going to send this guy, because that's all those places do anyways, is put you on a bus and send you to AA meetings and give you a fucking soft serve ice cream when you get home. And I think that and what else did he say? He goes, AA, you don't have to be smart to clean up. It's not very difficult because look at you and look at me. Because he was a dumb mother. He was just a simple dude. And he's like, I got it together and you can't figure it out. So it's got nothing to do with being smart. And I remember that too. I came back to San Francisco and my life got even worse. I was doing crazy things. I was involved with this gang of yahoos, some of which you know pretty well.
No names.
It had to do with, the lead character passed away a couple years ago, but had to do with somebody was on speed going through dumpsters getting checks and stuff, and somebody else was doing printing checks, and we had guys cashing checks, and it was my job to make sure that the people cashing the checks would come back with the money to split. They wouldn't just, And I remember holding this fucking fucked up kid who had, like a spinal injury, so he walked with his head down like this, and pulling a knife on him on the bus, like, no, you can't get, you're coming back with me, and just
because he had the money and he had to bring it back.
Yeah, and he was trying to skip out with, these are like, a fair chunk of change for junkies. It's like, you want to run off the bus and keep 600, or do you want to come back, keep your 200, and it was such a sleazy. It just wasn't me, and I learned a lot about crime, and that's where I kind of learned the aesthetic for hustle. Like, wow, down at the bottom, crime.
That's why you did all that stuff.
Yeah, I was getting research, but there's people like crime, guns. There's not guns out there because junkies sell. If it's worth something, they're gonna fucking sell it.
Yeah, right.
And people fuck up. People, in the drug business, nobody ever shows up on time. Nothing ever goes right, and that's the reality of it's not like the fucking Godfather or jewel thieves, international jewel thieves. It's it's a fucked up sleazy affair with terrible people that you wouldn't want to spend any amount of time with. And then when I became a cab driver, I drove around this mafia-connected bookie guy, and I learned a lot more about organized crime, the gambling, and it was the same lesson. It's like these are.
One time you drove the guy around, or just like
No, regular. He was my regular guy. I used to drive him to the card clubs, and he was just.
And he would just tell you shit.
Oh yeah, he has a big talk, and that's what gangsters love to gossip.
Gangsters, they want the mic just like we do, man. Love me, mommy. Or
they always want to give you the inside story. Oh, Willie Brown, let me tell you something.
Let me tell you about this guy.
Yeah, so but yeah, that was that's why I have that. That could never happen. I really wanted to show the world what my experience was on the lower echelon.
When you jumped ship, basically at the rehab, Betty Ford.
Yeah.
You came back here.
Yeah.
What did you come back here to? Where did you come back that first night back? You got off the bus.
I don't exactly remember. I do get pulling into the downtown bus station in LA. I remember with my last $15 or whatever, going, how long do we got? Bolting out of the bus station, finding like some homeless dude shooting up in a tent with I believe maybe a dirty needle if I recall correctly, doing that. God damn it! You sure you don't? Oh, all right, fuck it. And that like dark time. And I do remember the day I got back, I was at in a phone booth somewhere around like Eddie and Larkin area, calling my dad. Maybe it was Eddie and Polk, but and talking to my parents. And some dude got stabbed like about 30 feet from me while I was on the phone with my parents. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm back, and it's gonna be okay. I can do it my own. And lying. And yeah, I do remember that experience.
Do you remember the first night you ever spent outside with nowhere to go?
Not specifically the first night. I remember a lot of them though, because I was not. I couldn't like camp out on somebody's doorstep. I couldn't, So I rode the buses a lot. I tried the shelters a few times, and here's my thing about shelters, like that Fifth and Bryant,
yeah.
St. Vincent. What a charming place. It's like prison without the luxury of security. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And once I'm leaving, because they had me in a room with it's just insane people that you feel like it's just dangerous. It's dangerous and smelly and terrible. And it was easier just to be up all night.
Yeah, well, as a bipolar, half the time I was in LA, I was having like this huge manic episode.
Oh, I remember you watering yourself in your wading pool in the front yard.
That was probably on more of a sane day, but there was times when I would just be like, I'd be gone for like 4 days, right? And I'd be awake the whole time.
Yeah.
And I remember one night, some people gave me acid at Club of No Name, and I gave this huge black dude like $20 just to walk around with me so I wouldn't die. And we went like I don't know where the fuck we went into some like just torn down project-y places where it was like just the weirdest people you'd ever imagine, and I didn't die. And then
You earned it then.
Well, I just couldn't. The point is, like, sometimes when you're out there and you got nowhere to, you might just stay up.
It's just best to keep moving.
Just to keep moving.
And I, you sleep for 15 minutes on the bus, and you find out you're at the end of the line. You got to get off. You got your little shitty rolling tobacco or whatever, or your tiny. I did the BART thing a lot.
You don't smoke cigarettes anymore.
No.
How long ago?
I don't know, at least 5 years.
5 years.
The patch. Went the patch route.
Did you really? I quit when I was 38. So 19 years now. It's crazy. I was dating a hippie girl. Only really a hippie girl I ever dated. I think I just wanted to see what it was like. And she said that when she saw a guy smoking, she didn't want to mate with him. And I had this one of those like fucking thunderbolt moments where I realized like maybe some girls won't have sex with me because I smoke. It was that simple, and I just never smoked again.
And sex came just in by the truckload. No,
that didn't happen either.
But it does make me realize just how fucking stinky and awful smoking is. I had no clue.
I didn't either, man. I used to eat a breath mint when I dated this girl in Hollywood. And I thought that I could go out on the balcony and smoke, just eat a breath mint, and it'd be fine. But then when I quit, I could smell from a block away someone was a smoker.
Yeah, now, if you're in a car, you smell somebody smoking like 5 cars up.
I'm like offended now. I'm like true San Francisco offended when someone smokes near me.
I miss it in my brain. Like I miss the act and the idea and the relaxation, being able to step outside or whatever. I miss smoking kind of, but I don't. I mean, the way I quit with the patch, but the way I convince myself mentally is I imagine every cell in my body being starved of oxygen, which is kind of what it felt like. And I also the last time I quit, like maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and then picked it back up again because my wife started smoking, and I just noticed how just like we were saying with accelerating the accelerating aspects of addiction. I was just constantly obsessing on it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, when am I going? Or does this place? Or do you allow me to smoke? Or I just smoked. Can I go smoke again? I just smoked. I got to eat. Oh, I eat something now. I feel like smoking now. I feel nauseous again. I got to eat. It was eating up so much of my brain space. I was like, fuck it.
Yeah, I'm going through that right now with whiskey. Because like for years I was just drink a little red wine with my wife every night, smoke a little weed. But then when I had this fucking back problem, I found I didn't want to do opiates. So I was like, fuck that. And nothing really helped except like a good stiff whiskey drink.
Yeah.
And I just got used to just having one every night, and then one, and it's like 2 PM, and you start thinking about that whiskey you're gonna have.
It's funny. I have a similar issue right now with whiskey, and for because it's kind of like in an awful way, like throwing the Coke in the dope. Like once you get used to having a beer with a shot, I just kind of want that. I want that extra kind of little kick each time, and it's not like. You obviously don't feel it in the brain the same way, but there's something sort of, I just, when I started having beers, I started craving a little whiskey. Whiskey used to fucking make me sick. As a matter of fact, once I copped dope down on 16th Street, and these cops pulled me aside, and I totally remember this too. They grabbed me, and I go, and actually he grabbed me by the throat, so I couldn't swallow, but I managed to swallow these balloons, and he goes, what did he say? He said, "Yeah, you swallow it. That's a good convict. Enjoy your AIDS." And I was like, "Oh, all right then." But I was like, "Well, what do I do now?" So, and whiskey used to fuck me up so much. I went and bought a little airplane bottle of Jack Daniels and threw it back like the kaopectate or something, and immediately vomited.
Oh, that works for you. Yeah.
But now, I love me some Maker's Mark, and
you just can't keep it around is the thing. I buy those airplane bottles when I go busk on the street. I got one little one here, maybe 2.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I'm like, oh, that's my fuel for my sad country songs,
My wife doesn't get why I buy the little airplane bottles. And it's like, because if because it's not very financially sound.
It's not, but
But if I buy a larger one, I'll drink. I may not drink it all, but I'll drink more than that amount. It really freezes. But like everything else, man, I've had a lot of experience quitting shit, so I I know I have the tools. There's addiction and there's dependency, and I think I remember being in that rehab and being across from like people who had coke problems and stuff or speed problems, and I was so like, you're not addicted, man, I'm addicted. But then I realized that no, that is the difference is the dependency with opiates and nicotine. There's a dependence as opposed to just an obsession, which is also really fucking valid. When I realized after all those years and I had been doing some other drug or something in it, you get obsessive about it.
Well, you're addicted. Everything's addiction. You get addicted to like negative thinking or bad ways of thinking about stuff. Did you ever surrender, like completely surrender to whatever your understanding of God was to give up dope?
I don't think truly, no.
Yeah.
I may have said it for some free donuts. You know what I mean? The lessons and tools that I took from the 12-step, which I still utilize some today, I never really worked a program properly, never had a sponsor, but it got me over the hump. But I was also smoking weed.
Did you make amends?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to my epiphany with marijuana, this is an odd thing. At the height of my strike, this is like maybe close to Thanksgiving. And I ended up cleaning up around Christmas 2000. And I was leaving 24th Street BART, and there was this homeless dude playing guitar, busking down there, and sitting on this like cardboard box, which he's melting into. His hands were puffy from dope and stuff, and he was singing "Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone." And I remember I was on the escalator, and I was turning around and watching him going like, just having the heartbreak, feeling sick, feeling dope sick, and I looked down, and there's a joint with a nice filter in it, like which you didn't really see too often then, and that was kind of like my little, my thing. I'm like, oh my God. So I went and smoked that joint, and even though I was sick, I felt amazingly better. And I was like, holy shit, because I had gotten so separated from beer and bong hits that all my money went to dope, and I forgot that when I thought of what I want to feel like when I'm high, or when I want that's what I want. That's what my brain requires, not all this fucking heroin. So I started like going and buying like nickel bags of like shitty Mexican weed from the guys in Dolores Park and stuff while I was living in a squat and going to AA and and working a job. And that was like that really started me, that weird moment. And it's hard to admit because I don't tell that story a lot because it's not very, oh yeah, you found a joint in BART, so that really,
that's a great story.
But it's true, and that's why I leaned on marijuana for the next 10 years, and it completely, well, I guess it saved my life. But it is okay. So I do want to say this in case we're wrapping close because I thought about this sometime. I'm trying to remember the pitcher's name, but those early experiences that were like our first gig at Short Dogs was actually, it's kind of funny. So we played The Sound of Music, and I had these girls from Canada sing with me at my little place on Pierce Street. The place got raided by the cops, and they shut it down after 3 songs. And that fucking guy, the other Filipino guy, not Ness, whoever ran The Sound of Music, he like disappeared from the place. And the cops came in, and I was under 21 at the time, and they were like, who's in charge here? Well, you've got a microphone in hand, you're in charge. Yeah. And that place was shuttered for like 8 months after that. But anyways, my point is that those first experiences are such a monumental thing. My biggest thrill as a writer, and I thought, when I signed that book contract, although I remember the rough trade contract, so my expectations were not high, but when I got my first little story published online, and that moment was like, wow, I've arrived, and what I learned from that, humiliating experience with rough trade is to cherish that moment, and after that, it does kind of, not to say there are kicks and no excitement, but those first things, and I'm trying to remember the pitcher's name. I always think
Oral Hershiser?
Yes. So I heard him in this interview. And people are always asking me, what's it like to pitch in the World Series? And what's it like to, to be on that kind of, stage? And he goes, people never believe me, but I tell them that it's just as exciting when you're in your first playoff in Little League, because the moment the how your brain and body respond is all the same. It's and it's the same amount of thrill.
Yeah.
And people are like, no, that can't be. And I've come to realize that it is true. That when we Short Dogs opened for Suicidal Tendencies at a pig farm in El Paso, and they were such assholes to us. They wouldn't give us any cold beer from their fancy bus. We had our little shitty thing, but we came out on stage at the pig farm, where when people moshed, a big cloud of dust, big dust would come up. But we came out on stage, and there was it was the second year. We were returning heroes. We had played with the Descendants the year before at some other place, and there was
A roar.
Yeah, well, to us it was a roar. It was probably just, heavy applause. But just that, I still remember that.
Yeah.
And that was, I got to remember that sometimes that's enough.
It is. It's not just sometimes.
Yeah, but it's true. But just to learn that, I'm never going to win awards for the fucking books.
You don't know that.
Well, I do. Because I'm not the kind of guy that wins awards. Because you know what? And I'm. It sounds like I'm trying to get down on, but I don't. I'm just not hitting those buttons that the people who win the awards win. I don't write the kind of books that because the hustle is just. It's not a cozy mystery. It's not going to be in the airport bookstore. You know what I mean?
Not now. Until your sixth book sells like a shitload, and they go back and not only publish everything you've ever written, everything in your notebooks, like Stephen King sells books. It's Richard Bachman, It's like
I feel lucky to have been able to fucking create something and put it out there. That's the process, right? Creating and being able to present it. But maybe you don't get a fucking blue ribbon, or maybe it doesn't sell 1 million copies. But you were able to go through that process, and I think that's valid. I heard Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
And he was saying that, for years, he just I'm not depressed. I have anxiety. That's all. I have anxiety. And, in the interview, I asked, what about, when you're on stage? He goes, you would think that when you're actually on stage, that's when you have the most anxiety. But the fact is, you're creating. So while you're creating, you are truly in the moment. And it wasn't until the lights went off and I got off stage. I was like, what am I going to do tomorrow? I got to get sleep before then. And where do I got to be? And all that other shit piled in. But when you're when you're in the act, when you're in front of the mic with a guitar on your hand, or when you're, typing the sentences and you're locked into the story and the world disappears, that's the sort of Buddhist mindful moment.
But how about this question? Final question.
Yeah.
Are you happy?
No. Well, it's... I don't know. I certainly come off as generally jolly, but I don't. That's such a weird question. I may be happy, but I'm not satisfied.
There you go.
You've still got to keep moving forward.